Welcome to BeyondBIM. In today's episode, I have the pleasure to speak with the lead author of the recently published book, Construction 4.0. That is, Professor Anil Sawhney. We discuss the topic of Construction 4.0 and its impact on industry and professional bodies in the built environment. Anil is presently the Director of the Infrastructure Sector for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, RICS. He leads the emerging RICS initiative and strategy on placing and positioning the institution within the field of commercial management of infrastructure projects. He still keeps himself immersed in academia by being a visiting professor at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK and as an adjunct faculty at the University of Southern California. In today's episode, Anil reminds us to keep a focus and the balance right between technology and the changes required for processes within the industry as a whole. And now, let's take a listen to what Anil has to say on the state of Construction 4.0. First off, Anil, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and what got you interested in the built environment in the very first place?
Sure. So, Erica, I'm a civil engineer by training, and I was, as soon as I graduated from a civil engineering program in India, to me, construction engineering and management came naturally. So I wanted to be on the technical and managerial aspects of large and complex projects. So then from there on, I took keen interest in working in the area of construction project management more broadly, and then simulation. So that has been sort of a driving force for me to see how projects can be managed better in the built environment space. I did a PhD that related to construction project planning in the University of Alberta, and then got a chance to work in academia in the US. So I worked as teaching in universities in the US. More recently, I was an associate professor tenured at Arizona State University, where I taught construction management courses. But one of the key highlights of my work as part of my background is that I have always enjoyed interfacing with the industry. So early on, I got a chance to work with some of the local construction companies to look at how to innovate, how to improve, how to enhance and make processes and practices more effective. I got an opportunity to work with the World Bank on the International Comparison Project, where we worked on a methodology to compare construction costs across national boundaries at an international scale. So all these aspects gave me a good background and a solid interest in built environment. So currently I work for the RICS as the director of the infrastructure sector. Broadly, I look at global best practices in construction and infrastructure and try and connect these with creation of a knowledge base, also help in producing training and a lifelong learning products and services for professionals in the built environment space.
Okay. And more recently, you have first authored the book titled Construction 4.0. What was the original incentive to publish on this particular topic? Why now?
The answer really relates to what I personally saw working closely with the industry over many years, working with some large construction companies on large construction projects. The intent to improve ongoing projects through the improvement of processes and practices was constant. I saw that desire on all projects and in all companies that I worked with. But what I noticed was there were initiatives that were either at the project level or at the company level that were not by design, but ended up being siloed. So if there was an initiative in a large company to look at BIM, it focused on BIM in a certain narrow way. Similarly, if there was an initiative to bring in lean practices on construction project sites, that also sometimes generally remained isolated initiative. Similarly, sustainability related efforts were siloed or more or less not holistic in nature. So I always felt that these improvements and innovations needed to be much more cohesive, much more holistic, and much more connected. So because in order to achieve that transformational change and benefits on projects and organizations, it's very crucial that we connect these pieces together. So as in manufacturing and in other parts of the world, other parts of the economy, as Industry 4.0 came about and showed that with technology, how you can take a holistic approach and create improvements and benefits for all stakeholders in a much more holistic way. So as we discussed amongst colleagues, as I discussed amongst my co-authors, Professor Mike Riley and Professor Javier Irizarry, we thought that if we can come up with a framework that glued all these efforts together and talked about a framework or a paradigm that not only looked at perhaps digital technologies or principles and practices related to lean and other aspects, it may provide a framework which can help the discussion about improvement and innovation in our industry in a much more systematic fashion. So that became a motivation for us as we proposed this book about 2 years ago. And through the peer review process of the proposal, we found that there was resonance to this idea of creating this holistic framework in which you can not only discuss and talk about how we can improve what we construct or fabricate, but we could also connect it to how we develop and use digital tools, and then connect it also to how we procure and deliver, because in isolation, these three transformations can yield benefits. But if they were combined together in a Construction 4.0 framework, we felt that the industry can benefit in a much better way.
And you mentioned the Construction 4.0 framework, but can you explain the concept for a novice? How different is the Construction 4.0 framework from what we might know in relation to Industry 4.0?
So Construction 4.0 truly is an adoption or adaptation of the Industry 4.0 concept and applies to the construction or the built environment sector more specifically. So in the Construction 4.0 framework, we not only focus on the technology layer, that is, not just worry about the various things people are talking about, like IoTs, drones, robotics, automation, 3D printing, or additive printing. We really tried to connect what is it that Construction 4.0 is, what does it use, how does it work, what does it do for us as a sector, and how does it help us in the end, if we talk about broad benefits to the various stakeholders in industry. So we define Construction 4.0 as a paradigm. So what is it? It's a paradigm or way of thinking. It uses broadly cyber physical systems, or what today is called digital twins, and Internet of Things data and services. So that's what are the components. It essentially helps you connect the digital layer, which in today's terms is the building information model, alongside a common data environment, and the physical layer, which is essentially the asset as it comes into fruition over its whole of life. But all of this is done to create an interconnected environment that integrates organizations, processes, and information, and eventually helps us efficiently design, construct, and operate assets. So we've taken what is very well known and perhaps very well defined, the Industry 4.0, from the manufacturing sector as originally thought of in Germany, and tried to adopt and adapt in order to give us a holistic framework to discuss. And we coin or use the term construction 4.0. Some people also call it the industrialized construction. I think it's really a term which helps again address this idea of a holistic combination of emerging trends and technologies into one discussion.
And for the skeptic that might ask, well, how transferable are these concepts from manufacturing into construction? What would you say with regards to the Construction 4.0 framework?
This is a very well-established discussion. We discuss why and how building a car or manufacturing a car is different from building or constructing a constructed asset. Yes, there are several differences, and they've been well documented in the industry. But I think personally, I feel we are well beyond that point of discussing those differences. And in some ways, COVID-19 has accelerated the discussion past that those differences. People are now more clear as to what are the benefits of Industry 4.0 in the construction sector. But that does not mean that there are not challenges. Challenges still remain, but they are largely what I call structural, cultural, and mindset kind of issues. We still sometimes feel the change is unnecessary. We are already doing things similar to what is being proposed in Industry 4.0. But I think those can be overcome. Largely, it really goes down to discussing how we transform the procurement regime, because in many ways, technology is already there. It is hampered by the contractual boundaries that exist between the various project team members on large and complex projects. So that is why, as I pointed out in the beginning, Construction 4.0 talks about three transformations that need to take place simultaneously. I call it the physical transformation, that is, transformation in the way how we construct and fabricate the products and spaces that go into an asset. So that's one pillar of transformation. The second pillar of transformation that needs to simultaneously and concomitantly take place is the transformation of how we build digital tools and how we use them in terms of our construction processes and constructed assets. But more importantly, the third piece, the transformation of the work practices, the processes, the delivery mechanisms, and the procurement regime needs to take place simultaneously. One transformation alone will not be able to accomplish the vision of Construction 4.0. So most of the barriers that I see are in relation to the third pillar, the pillar that connects to the procurement, the delivery, the work practices, and the people aspects of our industry. So we need to transform that in conjunction with the physical and the digital transformation to overcome some of those barriers, some of those hindrances, and some of those obstacles.
And based on the transformation that you say need to happen, do you believe that the current state of the construction industry is ready for Construction 4.0?
Broadly, yes, but we have to understand that the industry is large. It has subsectors. It has various flavors and aspects to it that need to be considered. On the one hand, we have very large and complex projects where technology is being deployed rapidly. The acceleration of transformation has definitely increased during and perhaps after COVID-19. But then there are other project types, other organization types that may still not be convinced or not be ready or may not have the resources to embrace some of these transformations that we talk about Construction 4.0. So truly, in order to make this transformation happen, we need to take a whole of industry approach, a whole of asset approach, a whole of life approach. Without which I don't think it is possible to have all aspects of the industry and all participants of the industry embrace the change and the transformation.
And you talked about some of the core challenges with the last pillar, but what specifically do you see are the challenges moving towards achieving that vision that is described in the book?
I think there are a number of issues, but I would broadly categorize them into perhaps number one, talent and skills and competencies related issues. I came across a recent study in which large companies in the UK were surveyed and interviewed, and they said that 67% or roughly of the respondents said that they employed experts from other domains to undertake transformation in their organizations. So clearly we face a challenge in terms of getting graduates with the right skills, having educational institutions also embrace this transformation and adjust and change their curricula to address some of the trends and emerging paradigms out of Construction 4.0. So largely we have the skills issue where new graduates as well as existing professionals need to consider skills and competencies that are aligned with the physical transformation, the digital transformation, and the transformation in procurement and delivery. So that's a huge effort that is required to bring everyone up to speed when it is connected to skills and talents. The second aspect, I think, is that we still need to do a lot more research that connects these pieces together rather than having independent and sometimes siloed research that talks about one aspect of technology on one type of project for one category of project team members. We may need to start thinking of more integrative and a larger scale research that can address these three transformations combined. So there is some R&D effort that is not necessarily sitting within universities, but perhaps in the boundaries of universities, large and small companies, and government bodies working together to address some of the challenges that we face. And some of that is already taking place. A good example would be transforming construction effort going on in the UK, where universities, large professional bodies, large and small construction organizations are working with the government to bring about some of these transformations related to digital, related to platform-based product approach when it comes to physical transformation and changes and challenges that take place in procurement. So I think R&D is another important aspect that is required to be clearly thought through. Lastly, and more importantly, I think there is a need to bring some structural and cultural changes within our industry if we want to remain resilient and competitive as we move forward post-COVID in a global environment that is going to be focused for some time on stimulus and recovery, and construction and infrastructure sector may have a large role to play. So we need to address those three broad themes in order to take Construction 4.0 or any major transformational program for our industry.
And obviously, with these changes that require also a cultural shift, businesses and business leaders of potentially incumbent firms, should they be viewing the Construction 4.0 as an opportunity or an existential threat?
From my point of view, it is a great opportunity, and we are in conversation with some large construction organizations to take this as a framework for their transformation. So all these forces today of our health crisis, the economic crisis that is coming along, and perhaps some of the social injustices happening across the globe, all provide a platform or an opportunity for the industry stakeholders to look at these and the Construction 4.0 or the industrialized construction framework as a set of changes that are for the good. They will improve the image of our industry. They will make our projects more effective, more efficient. They will provide bigger, broader opportunities to not only incoming members to our profession, but also to professionals who are now experts and want to continue, grow, and do lifelong learning within our sector. But I can see that if we don't address this issue properly, and if we do not take a holistic approach, some members of the industry may seem this as a threat. Especially, there could be a possibility of viewing this as adverse to small and micro organizations, and they may think that these changes may leave them out of bigger and major participation in the industry. But I do not think that is the case. If this is done right, we will have opportunities for skilled experts who know their domain and who can contribute and really provide an integrated view to the various problems and challenges that we face in the industry today.
And so to get it done right, how do you envisage that journey to achieving Construction 4.0 should take shape? What might those milestones look like?
Personally, I think being an educator and a researcher by background, I think there is a need to define a roadmap similar to what Industry 4.0 and in many countries has done. They've created a sort of a national roadmap that talks not just about research and development, but also about education and skills. It talks about the role of various key stakeholders, including government, including construction organizations and professionals and professional bodies such as the RICS that can play a global role in bringing together these roadmaps. So I think the first bit would be, and this is, I guess, nothing new and has been done before, but using Construction 4.0 or industrialized construction as a framework, in my view, We need to come up with a roadmap for implementation. It's not going to be a short-term process. It's a long-term journey that one needs to undertake. So creation of a roadmap and a clear dissemination of that roadmap would be useful. The second, as I said before, is really a whole of industry, a whole of asset, a whole of life cycle approach, meaning bringing partners together from the education sector, R&D sector, from the industry, from the government and professional bodies together to implement the roadmap is something that is also going to be crucial if one were to achieve this very broad vision for the future of our industry, for our sector. So I think those are some of the major steps that are needed as we move forward in embracing these changes.
So obviously you mentioned RICS there. How do you think RICS and other professional bodies can kind of keep abreast of all these changes as they're so dynamic? Do these frameworks, are they created in a manner that they're flexible enough to stay up to date with all the latest technologies that will proliferate?
I think that's a very important question. And just if I may first address this issue of changes in technology, I think that's why it is important to remember that technology is only one of the layers or one of the transformations that one needs to focus on. Because as we know, and we definitely want technology to progress, to advance, and to change. So if we are very reliant and simply focused on technology layer and connect the remaining layers only to the technology layer, then we will definitely have issues as and when there are changes to the technology layer. Organizations like RICS are moving towards a digital first approach, meaning all products, services, and interactions with our community, with our members and others that we serve are moving into a digital platform, providing that flexibility and that arrangement where any changes just to a simple technology layer can be addressed as we move forward and make progress. So I think similarly, therefore, it is crucial not to just get focused on, and I'll take the example of BIM, largely, and I'm guilty as well of this, our focus remained on adoption and implementation of BIM. I think on the contrary, BIM and CDE really are a catalyst towards reaching the end goal of digitalization of our work practices and processes. So as long as the focus is right and the balance is right, I don't see any disruptions, major disruptions caused by changes in the technology layer. So the BIM and CDE and technologies and processes and practices that support that may change. But if we know that our end goal is digitalization and embracing of some of these best practices from Industry 4.0 into our sector, I think we will be in a better situation and better placed to and become more resilient to these types of changes.
And finally, for any other researchers, now that you have had your research career, but you're working with RICS, what advice would you give to other researchers in our field who want to make a change and who want to create impact?
I think that's a very good question. As I was progressing through my career, I would definitely focus on one area, one aspect. And I felt I was generally driven by technology. So I would take technology as the front runner for my ideas. And that definitely has a place. We definitely still need to make improvements, make changes, focus on technology, and continue to do that. But as I progressed, I could see that to some extent, that was a narrow approach. One needed to start connecting it to broader impact or major challenges that the industry or society was facing. So rather than looking at the research problem that I was trying to address and solve from a technology point of view, I started viewing that from an outcomes and output point of view, and especially connecting it with some of the challenges that our sector, our industry, or society at large was facing. So, for example, I shifted my thinking towards affordable housing. So some of my work, especially when I was based in India, was focused on affordable housing. How do you use technology, people, processes, practices in delivering affordable housing, which at that time and still continues to be a major challenge for many of the Indian cities and rural areas. So I became involved in a program that was launched in 2015 called the Housing for All program, in which technology was definitely going to play a role, but that technology layer alone could not solve the affordable housing problem. So I became keenly aware by interacting with stakeholders. So when they would talk about the utilization of the affordable housing unit by the end user, technology took a back seat. It could only answer some of the questions, but you needed a bigger platform to answer the remaining questions. So as one progresses through their research and development and scholarly process in their career, I think these things become evident. So my advice would be to think of the end user, think of the bigger, broader challenges that the industry and the society face, and also engage with stakeholders to understand some of the problems, pain points that they are facing, and how we can work together to make changes and improvements that'll help address some of those issues. So I am guilty of this as well. Had a hammer looking for a nail kind of a situation. I think as you grow, you try and avoid those pitfalls and look for better ways to engage in the research process.
And are you currently working on any research with the RICS, or are you focused on the bigger, impactful areas of change? What are you currently working on?
My way of working has certainly changed and shifted slightly based on how we at RICS work with our members and our member companies. But broadly, those themes have remained. Recently, as a follow-up to Construction 4.0, I worked with Autodesk to write a white paper that addressed one of the challenges that I talked about earlier, which relates to skills and competencies and talent. So this white paper essentially looked at if industrialized construction or Construction 4.0 were to take place in our industry, what would be the new roles and new teams that would be needed by a construction organization? So we essentially looked at robotics and automation. We looked at DFMA. We looked at data. If all those methodologies, technologies, and emerging trends were to be embraced, we would certainly need perhaps a new chief data officer. We would need a robotics and automation manager. So what could be those new roles 5 to 10 years from now in our industry? So that's one extension we did to our study jointly between RICS and Autodesk. I work closely with large construction organizations to look at the issues of benchmarking and how data can be utilized to benchmark construction projects and its various aspects. Similarly, I work closely with organizations to look at the social value of our projects, especially infrastructure sector projects that we deliver. How can we embrace the aspects of social value and its delivery during the design, construction, and operation stages of our projects and assets. So I think it provides a little bit of a different type of platform, but it certainly helps us still continue to address the key challenges and opportunities that the industry provides.
And where could our listeners find out more about the work that you've just described?
Some of the work that I just described is available on our RICS website. The Autodesk RICS report that was recently released is available on the Autodesk website and RICS website. We have just released recently a paper on the future of BIM and its role in the digital transformation of the construction and infrastructure sector. That is also available on the rics.org website. Very soon, end of this month or in August, we'll be releasing our insight paper on benchmarking and its role in the infrastructure sector. And again, the social value, measuring social value of infrastructure sector projects. Paper will be released also in August. We do a number of webinars. There's an upcoming webinar in August where we talk about the strategies for measuring and reporting from a decarbonization point of view of the built environment assets. So these are venues through which some of the work that we are doing is made available. And I'm happy to send out more information via email as well.
Thank you for tuning in to listen to Beyond BIM podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more from our latest episodes, then you can visit Beyond BIM, which is available on SoundCloud and iTunes and all the other major podcast providers.